Perfect.
All right, so I wanted to talk to you about House File 692. It's the language saying that we're going to have barcoded envelopes for satellite voting now, or absentee ballots now.
Right.
And I figured you'd be the man to get a hold to talk to. You may be using the camera's microphone. Just tested this, I swear.
All right, that's fine.
Oh.
You didn't come in the last time, did when we?
No, I talked to you over the phone.
Is
yeah.
it over the phone, did we? Okay, I was thinking I had met you, but,
Yeah, I'll shoot the audio from that.
okay.
So, the reason I started paying attention to this bill is because the language came from another bill, the bill to presumably ban voting on public campuses.
Right.
And before we started on 692, I wondered what your thoughts on that bill were.
Banning voting on
Yeah,
campuses?
public campuses, where it come from, why it was proposed, what it was trying to do.
Well, the origination of the Senate bills is from Senator Robbie Smith of Davenport. He's the chair of the State Government Committee. And so I'm not sure where he came up with some of these ideas. He's supposedly doing this under the guise of trying to make elections uniform across the state of Iowa. But at the same time, he seems to be disenfranchising what's assumed to be making or erecting barriers, at least, what's assumed to be Democratic voters. He happens to be a Republican senator. To ban satellite voting in public universities, but yet allow it to occur in private universities seems to smack of unfairness. I'm not sure, again, I think it was targeted at the University of Iowa and Iowa State University and University of Northern Iowa, public universities with large student populations where, in the case of the University of Iowa, there are a lot of satellites on campus for the convenience of the voters to certainly engage the student population in voting. So I think that was kind of an anti-student voting portion of this bill, and I'm totally against it. The bill is, the entire bill is just a horrible bill.
Okay.
It's just a horrible bill.
Yeah.
And there might be a few things I could live in there, but they are vastly outweighed by the bad things that are in that bill.
Yeah.
And for example, you want to talk about intelligent barcode. The present state of that bill, as I understand from our legislative liaisons, is that intelligent barcode would go into effect and be mandatory for 4 years, and then in January of 2023, that would sunset. That clause of the legislation would sunset and no longer be in effect, and we would then transition to a sure count, what's called sure count, which means all absentee ballots have to be into the auditor's offices by 9 a.m. on election night. Anything received after 9 a.m. election night would not be counted. So I think the intelligent barcoding is a good thing. We are actually in the process of implementing that here. There was only 6 or 7 counties in the state that had it during this last election. It wasn't mandatory, and whenever the legislator does not make things mandatory, then you have uneven application.
Yeah.
And you have people getting around to it when they get around to it. So I think the case in Winnebago County where the votes were where the vote count was very close and ballots weren't counted because of the barcode showed everyone the value of the barcodes, and that it might have changed the outcome. I don't think it would have changed the outcome of that, even if they counted those ballots. It might have, but the problem was they were going to count. They'd already counted ballots in 1 or 2 counties, but they hadn't counted it in the 3rd county that happened to be affected by this legislative race. And so you have uneven application of election law, which usually leads to problems. So we're going to have it implemented hopefully by the time we have our election this fall, between when the combined city-school election is on the ballot.
What are the logistics for setting this up? I mean, I honestly, I don't even know what they look like. I was going to ask you if you have a sample of one I could look at while I was here.
I don't think we have it because we're not using it yet.
Right, yeah.
There's some things online that you could see, especially since it was highlighted during this legislative race.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, though, a human readable code that's on there. And so what's involved in setting it up is we have to work with the United States Postal Service. We have to apply with them. We have to send some sample letters, ballots, correspondence through the system. There's an online lookup tool to basically go look up that human readable barcode that's on there, and be able to basically see when that piece of mail entered the system on its way back.
You're
So
saying, what do you mean by human readable?
So I can read the numbers. So it's
Okay.
in an alphanumeric code that's there instead of it's a barcode, but there's also an alphanumeric code at the top that you can read off on it, and then you can look on a spreadsheet database and say, okay, this piece of mail came through the Cedar Rapids Post Office at X time on X date, and so that's what it is. The barcodes that they were using in the Winnebago County case were other barcodes that the post office put on the ballots, on the return ballots, that were not human readable. I have to have an application on my smartphone, or I have to go buy a barcode reader that can actually read that barcode and see what that date timestamp is on that barcode.
Okay. So the envelopes themselves aren't going to be statewide. Will be individual to each county then?
Say that again?
The envelopes we'll be using, the barcoded envelopes, will they be like a statewide application everyone using the same envelope, or will each county be responsible?
Every county's got their own envelope. Some people use, it depends on the ballot link. Some counties, depends on the election, depends on the preference of the auditor's office. You might use an 8.5 by 11, you might be an 8.5 by 14, might be one-sided, two-sided, it could be 2 different ballots.
Okay.
That's just the ballot. They may fold it, may do, we used to do flats where we never folded the ballot, so that's a bigger envelope. Some counties folded in 3s, some counties folded in 4s, so
Okay.
it's kind of, we kind of do things to reduce the cost of postage. That's one of our big costs of an election, is the cost of postage, because we pay the postage out, we pay the business reply mail postage back. So that ends up costing us, by the time you throw in labor and postage and everything, about $3 just for that out back postage thing. And intelligent barcoding is going to add another, potentially up to a nickel in cost of fixing that barcode onto that return envelope.
Good. And are voters going to have to go get the envelopes themselves?
No, we send them out to them.
Okay.
Yeah, that is uniform. In Iowa, if you request an absentee ballot, we receive your request, we mail the ballot out to you. You mail it back to us, we pay the postage both ways.
Okay. And you kind of started getting at this earlier, but do you think, because I wrote that story about the Modernization and Integrity Act last year, and there seems to still be this current of cultural paranoia around elections. Like, it's almost cool now to yell voter fraud. And do you think this is going to kind of like start simmering down now that the the investigation on the federal levels coming to an end with the Mueller report? Because it just seems like everywhere you go, there's a bill somewhere introduced that is trying to change the way we do elections. So I guess my
Right.
question is, are we ever trying to help ourselves too much to a fault? Is there ever a point where we get in our own way and kind of hinder the process instead of guiding it along?
Well, the the United States House of Representatives introduced House Resolution 1, and that had a lot of Democratic proposals in it because the House is now Democratic controlled. It's sort of dead on arrival on the Senate. It's not going to go anywhere. It seems after every election that either congressional leaders or legislative leaders in the state level want to tinker with elections. They think they've got a different idea. That's why in the state of Iowa, the statutes, just the statutes for election is probably close to 6 inches thick. I think it's 500 or 600 pages. So the legislators on the state, and federal level try to micromanage elections, and in some cases try to gain advantage through statutory processes like voter ID and some other things. So, like eliminating voting on on public universities, eliminating satellite voting. I mean, why would you do that? You're trying to gain some political advantage, or some perceived political advantage. So that's why those things happen, and that's why there's 500 or 600 pages of election laws in the state of Iowa. By and large, the states still run elections. So the Fed, if the Feds do too much, then the states will claim states' rights and basically sue for redress of grievances, perceived grievances against the federal government if they do too much overreach. But of course, the federal government tries to control elections via the pocketbook, funding this, funding that, and that's how they impose a lot of their things on there. So, do I think the rhetoric's going to simmer down? No, I think the rhetoric's going to be worse in 2020. I think whenever anyone doesn't get their way, that the go-to cry is going to be voter fraud or some other claim of that election official did something wrong, and that's just the environment right now. It's not it's not going to get any less. It's going to get more polarized now than we ever have been. There's less bipartisanship than there ever has been, and there's groups that are trying to gain electoral advantage via the statutes, via manipulation of election laws, more than there ever has been. So that's going to continue. That's just life.
Well, it's kind of a dreary note to end on, but I think you're right. Is there anything else?
Well, I'm trying to be realistic. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. I think we need people in elections that basically can ignore all that rhetoric and basically run elections that are fair and equitable, and that not only the winners trust the results, but the losers trust the results. And that's what makes this interesting. Yes, I am I am registered to one political party, but that's separate from my belief of how elections need to be administered on a daily basis. And that means we're fair to everybody. We have a level playing field. We don't play games, and we hope that people participate, because the more people that do participate in the process, I think the stronger we are as a county, as a nation.
I think that's all I got for you.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate
Always great to talk to the student press, and because journalists are, you're kind of the fourth arm of government.
That's what I hear.
Well,
That's what my journalism professor loves to say.
Well, it's true though, because I can